Hey, it's Marty Murray. I'm glad to be back here with you all on GMAT Club for doing this YouTube Live. Today we're going to be talking about critical reasoning. We're going to be going over some key things that you can use to make critical reasoning click. And, you know, we said 7 days. I've seen it work for people in as little as 7 days. Once you basically understand the overall aspects of how to handle critical reasoning, a lot of the time you can make it click pretty fast. I mean, you're not necessarily getting to a perfect score in a week, but you can really change your performance dramatically very quickly. And this, by the way, is one of 4 presentations we're going to do. We're going to do this this critical reasoning one. We're going to do a reading comp session. We're going to do a couple of sessions on how to be faster in GMAT verbal, how to be more accurate in GMAT verbal. So this is one of a series of 4, and we're going to be in each one of these. We're going to be covering things that I've seen work for person after person. Just got an email from someone who dug in using these exact methods, got that perfect verbal score. So it's pretty pleasing to see that right before the session. And let's rock. Let's have some good times. Let's see some stuff that's really going to help you rock critical reasoning today. It's not going to be everything you need to know about critical reasoning. It's more of an underlying mentality and thought process that you're going to use to handle any critical reasoning questions. Okay, so the first thing we want to do for critical reasoning is we have to understand the nature of the game overall. As I've discussed in previous videos, critical reasoning is not a word matching game. I mean, sometimes, yes, we need to pick up on what words match a little bit, but it's not a word matching game. So things where you're just trying to match the words in the passage and the answer choices aren't going to work. And in general, it's not a game of using tricks to choose answers. Oh, I'm going to eliminate all the ones that are extreme. GMAT knows we're doing that. We can't just eliminate extreme answers or any specific kind of answers. There's no real shortcuts, because what critical reasoning is a fairly sophisticated logic game, and that's the way we have to handle it. So we're going to handle it with logic. The 2 main things we're doing, 2 main bases of critical reasoning success, and they're not, you know, it's not super complicated at its base. And if we start from this level, we're really going to do well, because we're understanding where we need to be coming from, the very foundation of it. And it's 2 things. One is identifying the implications of statements. Like, you read a statement, you say, well, what does this mean to me? What does this mean for the scenario? You know, and it's so we're allowed to use some common knowledge and say, well, if this is happening, that in the real world means that this other thing is happening. So we can see what the implications would be of a statement in the real world. The second thing is making common sense connections. So if we find the implications of a statement, then we can make a connection between what that statement is saying and the passage or the argument or whatever else we're looking at. So identifying the implications of statements and making common sense connections. Let's do some examples here. These are very simple. These are not inference questions, okay? Each one of these is just, we're going to say, you look at this top part, okay, and say, you know, in this one, in Tirania, blueberries have been rare. Okay, read that and consider it sort of like an answer choice. And say, what can I take from this? Okay, what does this mean to me? You know, and then go through these 4 choices, which are not, once again, they're not inferences. They're what a reasonable person would consider the implications of the statement. So check it out and go through it, and then we'll talk about it. Just give you a minute to think of which one is probably correct. And you can put your answers in the chat. See what you think. Which one is most reasonable? And I'm not saying this is hard at all, okay? So, okay, that's probably good. Let's go through it. It says, in Tirania, blueberries have been rare because there's little land suitable for cultivation of blueberries, but recently a new method was discovered that allows 3 times the quantities of blueberries to be grown in the same amount of land. What effect on the price of blueberries can the development of the new method be expected to have? Okay. What can we expect? What's reasonable? Okay, well, it looks as if the cultivation of blueberries, something is changing here. We're going to get 3 times the quantity from the same amount of land. So they have been rare. So what can we reasonably expect? Well, they're not going to be as rare as they used to be. So is the development going to cause the price to go down, up? What's it going to do? Well, what do you think? Down? We have more blueberries? That's an interesting increase in supply. Do we think it's going to go up? Why would it go up? The price of blueberries, why would that go up here? The third, the development of the new method will cause the price to remain the same. I don't think so. And finally, the development has no clear relationship to the price of blueberries. Does that sound right to you? I don't think so, right? I mean, we do have more blueberries. We know there's more supply. So we can reasonably expect that the development of the new method will have a downward effect on the price of blueberries, right? That's what a normal, reasonable takeaway is. And this is how we want to look at answer choices in critical reasoning. Let's do another one. Okay, check this one out. It's about a beautiful beach. What do we know about beautiful beaches? And which one of these is a reasonable expectation? As if this were this initial thing, as if this were an answer choice in a critical reasoning question, what does it imply about this scenario with this beach? What does it reasonably imply? And I'm just saying it's what can we infer for sure. It's not a must be true. It's just if you saw this as an answer choice in a question, which one would you think? Okay. I'm seeing a lot of 2s come in. Yeah, and I agree. We see that it's a beautiful beach. We know what people do at the beach. They don't go there. It doesn't say it's known for its rainy beach, right? It's known for its beautiful beach. So people go to the beach when it's sunny. They don't go when it's rainy. And therefore, we can safely say people will likely spend more time. It's a reasonable expectation that they're going to spend more time. I'm sorry, I can't see my pen that well, so I keep hitting it in funny spots. But anyway, it's a reasonable expectation that more people will spend more time at the beach. Now, some people might say, well, it doesn't ever say how the passage never says, or the answer choice never says anything about how much time people are going to spend at the beach. So couldn't it be 4 that this is unrelated? So this is what we have to think about in critical reasoning. Just because a choice doesn't mention something doesn't mean it doesn't imply it, right? Okay, so even though this statement doesn't say anything about the amount of time, we can use common knowledge, and it's key in critical reasoning. They expect us to use common knowledge and say, look, if the days are much sunnier, much fewer are rainy, we're probably going to see more people, spending more time at the beach. It is connected in that way, even though it doesn't directly say anything about time. Let's just do one last one of these, just to go another angle. What do we think here? Any other thoughts? I see a 1 coming in. It's really kind of debatable, but let's see what would they be trying to do here? Yeah, I see a little debate between 1 and 4. And then a 3, right? So what's reasonable to expect here? right? It says, okay, after helping Z Corp achieve strong sales growth, the marketing director resigned and Z Corp had to hire a new marketing director. So we know that marketing director they have now is new. But do we really know anything about this marketing director? Can we really reasonably, like, if this were a weekend question, we say, oh, their sales growth is going to go up or down. Do we really know which way it's going to go? And in this case, I'm going to say this is kind of a trap. If this were in a question, it'd be kind of a trap choice, It'd be kind of saying, well, you think but do you really? Like, what's reasonable here? Do we know if this marketing director is better or worse? We don't. We just know the marketing director is new and strong sales growth are not that clearly connected. So I would give this the old 4, does not clearly connect. And you could see how this would be a trap choice in a question, right? Because it is a new marketing director. We know the old one did the strong sales growth, but let's face it, they're gonna throw this cognitive bias at us, and give us an opportunity to say, oh, what does my cognitive bias say? Well, it's a new marketing director, probably not as good as the old one, but we have no real reason to believe that. So that's the kind of thing they're gonna do when they create a trap choice, right? Okay, so our first takeaway for critical reasoning is that, as we said, the basis is identifying the implications of statements and making common sense connections. So we know we can make a common sense connection between sunny days and the amount of time people spend at the beach. We can make a common sense connection between supply of blueberries and the quantity of blueberries. And we can also say, well, it's not clearly connected there's not a clear connection between the fact that the marketing director is new and the amount of sales growth they're going to have. So let's take this for a spin in a question and look at this question exactly. Look at each answer choice. This is the thing. When you're looking at the answer choices in a critical reasoning question, look at them just as we've been looking at those statements. Is it an up? Does this choice take things up? Does it mean things are going to go up? Does it mean it's going to get weaker, stronger? You know what I mean? And I like to say it's kind of like the vectors in physics, these arrows with magnitude and direction. So each answer choice has a force that may show that things are going to increase, decrease, whatever. So one of the great things you can do in looking at answer choices, rather than just saying, is it irrelevant? Say, what is the impact? What is the force? Which way does this go? Up, down, sideways, nothing? What's going on here? Let's take a look at the question. Let's give you about 2 minutes to look at this one. And think of these answer choices really the same way you've been thinking about those statements. Do they take things up or down or sideways, or what's going on here? Okay, about another 30 seconds. Okay, let's go through this. See what you think. What's our best answer? I see a lot of D's coming in. We had a question about the beach question. So before we hit this, let me answer that. As far as the beach, we could say, like in the difference between the beach question and the marketing director question is that in the beach question, we have a clear connection between sunny days in the real world, between sunny days and the amount of time people spend on the beach. We don't know for sure that people are going to spend more time at the beach. We don't know, right? Anything could happen. But there's a reasonable expectation is people will spend more time at the beach. Whereas with the marketing director question, what's reasonable? Well, we know the director is new. The director could be better, worse, the same, be an old friend, have experience in the industry. All we know is new. And new and worse and new and better are really not the same thing, you know? So that's the big difference between those two questions. Okay, on this one here, I'm seeing a variety of answers. So let's go through and hit these answer choices the exact same way we went through those other statements and see what's going on. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about this program of drug abuse prevention education. I remember when my kids went through it. Became commonly offered in the schools in the late 20th century. Program was meant to reduce use of, so meant to reduce, right? And you can see that, that's why they did it, resistance education. Is meant to reduce use of drugs by young people. However, it's found that in some cases, people who have gone through the program were more likely to use illicit drugs than people who had not gone through it. And then the question here is, which explains the unexpected outcome? So, okay, one thing we want to do whenever we're answering a critical reasoning question, and this can up your accuracy huge. I'm telling you, I've seen it enough times, is make sure whether we're weakening, strengthening, whatever, we want to identify exactly what the correct answer must do. So when you see the unexpected outcome, you can call that a look above marker. We want to look above and make sure we know what the unexpected outcome is. If this were a weakened question, we want to know what the conclusion is. But in this case, we want to know what best explains the unexpected outcome. So we're going to say, well, what is that exactly, you know? Well, they were more likely to use, they became more likely to use illicit drugs than people who had not gone through it. So this is the unexpected outcome is an up arrow, an increase of people who had gone through the program using drugs. So now that we know what we need to explain, let's think about these choices. Which one gives us that up arrow? Which one takes things up, right? The up vector. Okay, many participants in the program did not believe that negative consequences discussed in the program truly occurred in most cases of use of illicit drugs. So they didn't believe it. So what does this mean? Well, this one means that the program didn't make much difference, right? This aspect, that discussing the consequences didn't make much difference, right? But not much difference. It's still a difference. It's a little up. It's a little down, rather, right? It's a little down. Like they did learn about the negative consequences, but they didn't believe it. So maybe that's a flat like this, or a little bit of down. That's actually sort of a down. That's what we want to look at these choices. Okay, so yeah, this is saying the program. If we weren't specific about the unexpected outcome, and we're saying, well, why didn't the program work? I don't know. Well, they didn't believe in the consequences. Then it would work, right? Then choice A would work. So the reason we need to be very clear about the unexpected outcome is because if we're not, then a choice like A, we're going to fall for it, right? Okay, let's look at B. During the late 20th century, the availability of many types of illicit drugs increased in the United States. You know what? There's an up arrow, right? That's definitely an up arrow. The availability increased. But is that the right up arrow? So let's take a look. Well, what do we have to explain? We have to explain why people who had gone through the program were more likely to use drugs than people who had not gone through the program, right? People who had gone through the program versus people who had not gone through the program. This explains it up for everybody. So it's wrong. That's definitely out. A is out. How about C? Participants in the program became more comfortable discussing issues related to illicit drug use with their parents and other adults than they were before going through the program. You know, I can see why you would choose this. And I'm going to keep it because, I don't know, maybe if people become more comfortable, they start using drugs more. But I don't know, there's another side to that too, right? Doesn't that mean the parents and other adults would have a chance to convince them not to use the drugs. So it's a little bit of a question mark. So let's look at D. The program included detailed discussion of the effects of different types of illicit drugs and methods for using those drugs. That one to me is interesting too. I'm going to keep it. Because if someone knows the effects, and it doesn't say the negative effects, it says all the effects. And methods for using, well, if I teach someone how to do something, maybe they're going to do it. So I'm going to keep D. Let's take a look at E. The program taught people to say no to drugs without helping them develop skills they could use to do so successfully in real world situations. So look at this one. This one is once again a lot like A. It's either a flat or maybe even a slight down, right? Because if they were taught to say no, then at least maybe they're going to say no a little more than they would have, right? So once again, if we weren't specific about what we need to do, what the correct answer needs to do, we could choose E, because this once again says, this is why the program didn't work. But the unexpected outcome is not that the program didn't work. The unexpected outcome is that up arrow, that increase in drug use, right? So E doesn't work either. Okay. So E is out. Let's take a look at these other two choices, the ones we have left. So it's war between C and D. C, participants in the program began discussing issues related to drug use. I don't know. That could go either way. The people could convince them to use them. Their parents could convince them not to use them. It's really not clear what's going on there, right? So I'm going to get rid of D, and we're going to select D, because clearly, if people are learning the methods to use things, that's our best answer. And is it a perfect answer? Maybe not, but I think it's a good answer for this one. So we'll select D, because there's your possible up arrow. It's our best up arrow to say that these people, they learned more about them. So there's your explanation of why he is. Any questions on this one? Yeah. So, okay. So someone is asking, what about choice A, right? You were thinking that if they didn't believe in the negative consequences. But here's the thing, it doesn't say they believe less in the negative consequences, right? We need some kind of trend, right? And it doesn't say the people believed in the consequences less than other people. We need a difference. We need some kind of change. We need an arrow, right? They did not believe. Okay, what about the other people? Is there an arrow, an up, a down? Nothing, right? Always look for that difference, that arrow, that effect. It doesn't say that there's some effect. It says, A basically says there was no effect of the program. Right. Okay. Could you please tell me the difficulty level? It's a pretty, I'd say it's a medium hard question. So maybe like a 600 to 655. Right. Okay. What's the last question? Yeah. Okay, cool. So you get the idea. You get the idea of this one. So our takeaway so far, second takeaway, definitely identify exactly, as opposed to vaguely, what the correct answer must do. Because if we go with vague, we're gonna have trouble identifying the correct answer, because we've broadened the room it can fit into, right? The space it can fit into. And it's funny. I was saying that's 600, 655. I guess it's actually probably under 600 questions. Starting with a relatively easy one, but this next one is a lot trickier. Just apply the same thing though, okay? In this next question, we definitely want to think about, well, which way does each answer choice take things? Be very careful. Look to make those common sense connections, okay? Take a look. This one is definitely, I think it's an upper 600s or 700 level question. So you definitely need to be a lot more careful with this one. Two minutes. Tricky one, right? Okay, another 15. Definitely a mix this time. It's a way harder question. Okay. Someone was asking, what about, before we get to this one, someone was asking about in the previous question, what about D? If people learning about the effects won't be learning about the negative effects. Yes, but it also mentions that they're learning how to use the drugs. They're learning about the effects, you know, so it doesn't say just negative effects. So it also can include positive effects. They're really learning about something. And especially the part with them learning about the methods for use. Well, if you teach someone how to do something, they just might try, especially if it's a kid. So we can make that common sense connection using what we know about the real world and how people operate. So this one is a lot tougher. And we're going to be going through different levels of questions through this whole session. So in this case, it's saying Rapid Repair, a company that owns a chain of bicycle repair shops, recently developed ways to automate some common bicycle repair processes. Each Rapid Repair shop automated can operate effectively with fewer technicians. We've got to notice that. So each shop can operate with fewer technicians than the shop requires for doing so without the automation. We want to notice all these details. However, as Rapid Repair has rolled out the automation, the number of technicians employed by the company has increased significantly. So once again, we have a sort of a paradox, and sure enough, it asks, which of the following best explains the surprising trend? And by the way, there's a reason I'm starting with paradox as opposed to weaken, strengthen, assumption, inference, because I find that it gives us the opportunity to really get into this mindset of seeing which way an answer choice take things. Okay, so that's why we're doing paradox first. We're going to get to the other question types, or a lot of them, in a minute, but we're going to start with paradox because we're getting used to saying which way does the arrow go here, which isn't quite as clear in the other question types. So we want to say which explains the surprising trend, right? So once again, we have to explain the surprising trend very, very precisely, right? So once again, we're going to look at, go back at this, so look above marker, the surprising trend, and we see the number of repair technicians employed by the company has increased significantly. Why is that interesting? Because we know that they don't need as many technicians per shop. So it's kind of weird that the number of technicians went down. So how we can explain that? Let's go through these choices. Starting with A, upper level management at Rapid Repair is aware that human technicians who can converse with customers, form relationships with customers that can lead to repeat business. It's kind of interesting. I could see keeping that, so let's keep it for now. How about B? Automating basic repair processes frees up technicians to handle other tasks necessary for effective operation of a shop. I didn't see many people choose B, and I think I know why. Because when we look at B, we see that this is really a down arrow for the number of employees we need, right? If it's freeing up the technicians, well, then they can do other things. Do we need more technicians? If anything, we need fewer people in the shop. So D is our easy out here. How about C? Currently, most of the tasks involved in repairing bicycles are too complex or delicate to be accomplished by means of automated processes. I think this is maybe the most interesting choice in this question. And this is really what I wanted to show you guys to get used to, because this really captures the crux of trap choices versus correct answers. Notice what this choice is saying. Most of the tasks, it's a strong statement about most tasks involved in bicycle repair. Most of these tasks are too complex or delicate to be accomplished by means of automated processes. So it sounds like a pretty strong statement, So it sounds as if it could mean we need more technicians, right? But I have a question. Is there a trend here? Do we see a trend? Do we see more tasks, an increase in tasks, an increase in bicycles? What's increasing here? Is there anything different now from before? Did these tasks not exist a year ago? Bicycles were so different? Not really. So this choice C, is actually a flat. It's a reason why we would maintain the technicians because, well, we need them, but need and need more are two different things, aren't they, right? So this is all about need versus need more. And this one does not say that we need more. It just says we need technicians. And the fact that we need technicians doesn't mean that they should have increased. So choice C actually is out. Let's look at D. The growth in the number of shops that rapid repair operates has been constrained by the cost of operating a shop. I don't know. What does that even mean? I don't know. It has been constrained. That doesn't sound good, but I'm going to keep it because it's a little hard to read, to be honest. How about E? Rapid Repair has found that its customers prefer to have their bicycles repaired by human technicians rather than via the automated processes. Look at this again. Notice what this is another one. This choice E is doing it again. It's need. This is basically saying this is why Rapid Repair would have some technicians. The customers prefer the technicians. Do we have new customers? Is there a trend? Where's the up arrow here? Right? So, this is how these trap choices are going to work. They're going to give us this, it sounds significant, important, but this is once again important versus more. Important doesn't mean we need more. It just means we need to keep them. So E, like C, is gone because it makes the technicians important, but it doesn't mean we need to increase them. So we're down to A, which sounds pretty good, and D, which is a little weird. And what we need to do here is make some kind of common sense connection. So let's look at A. Upper level management is where the human technicians who can converse with customers, form relationships with customers that can lead to repeat business. I'm wary of this choice, and here's my reasoning. It says they are aware, is aware. Upper level management is aware, right? They is aware. Okay, is that new? That's a present tense verb, right? Management is aware. Is that like, why are we hiring more? Why wouldn't they have hired more before? Is there a trend here? Where's the up arrow? If they sound good, I like having technicians around. They lead to repeat business, but didn't they lead to repeat business before the automation came out? Repeat business makes us think it's an up arrow, but repeat business is actually the same business that we were getting all along, right? Repeat business, sure. So upper level management might like technicians, but I think A might be wrong. So then we have to go to D. The growth in the number of shops that Rapid Repair operates has been constrained. So here's where we get into making these common sense connections. I see something about growth. Well, growth is certainly related to the number of technicians growing. And then I see something else, the cost of operating a shop, right? That would be related to replacing the technicians with automation, because common knowledge would be that they're not replacing the technicians with automation to increase the cost of a shop. So the growth in number of shops has been constrained by the cost of operating a shop. Well, how can we put that together? Has been constrained. Well, if it's been constrained by the cost of operating a shop, and it's reasonable to expect that the costs have been decreasing because they can operate effectively with fewer technicians, that's our reasonable expectation, right? That's why people automate. The costs are going down. Well, what that means to us is that the constraints have been reduced. So the number of shops can now go up, and that would be a possible reason why the number of technicians has increased. Because, yeah, the shops became more profitable, and they were able to expand. Now, someone might say, well, we don't know. We don't know that happened. We don't know that the number of shops expanded. We don't know that automating drove the cost down. We absolutely don't, but it's reasonable. And truth is, a best explains is often a could explain. So when you see best explains, it doesn't necessarily have to be the reason. It doesn't have to prove that it went up or definitely mean it went up, but it has to be something that could explain it. And the fact that the number of shops has been constrained by the costs, and now we can pretty well presume that the costs are going down, then that would explain it. Okay, so D is our correct answer. Any questions about this one? Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so I guess there's no specific questions at this point. I think you get it. Okay, and look at this. What we're doing is saying, well, what is the main thing this choice tells us in each case, right? What is the main thing? Choice A tells us the main thing that the technicians are, the management likes the technicians. Okay, great. Is that an uptrend? Choice C tells us that we probably need fewer people. The main thing, we always want to go through and say, what is the main thing this is telling us? Choice E tells us that we need to keep the technicians. That's the main thing it's telling us, right? You know, so keep it simple and identify what's going on with each choice. Okay, so here are our takeaways. To get through critical reasoning questions efficiently and answer them correctly, identify the main or essential thing each choice says, right? As we did. You know, some of these choices told us we need more. Some of them told us that technicians are important. You can boil down each choice to the main thing it says. The second thing is trap choices will have the vibe of doing what the correct answer will do, while correct answers will actually do it, right? So what do we see? C and E and A all have that vibe. Yeah, the technicians are important, right? So they had the vibe of telling us that we need more technicians, but only the correct answer really did what we needed. Okay, so our takeaway so far is be very clear about what the correct answer has to do and find the main thing each choice does and really look for that choice that actually does it. Now, will this work and weaken, strengthen an assumption in argument questions? Let's see. Let's do a weaken question that kind of works the same way. Take a look at this one. We got 2 minutes again. And okay, so a few questions came in on the last one. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, someone said could not comprehend D. Exactly. So here's one thing you want to do that I see so often with my students. You really want to make sure you understand each answer choice, understand each sentence in the passage. Get used to doing that. All too often, people miss questions just because they read something, don't fully understand it, and they're like, well, I'll do my best. Or they place a bet on what they think it said, right? Don't place a bet on what you think it said. Take the extra time. And I know we only have 2 minutes on the test, but when you're practicing, get used to making sure you fully understand something, because if you place a bet on what it probably means, there's a good chance you're going to get the question wrong. Okay, and some of the people are asking about the level. Yeah, that one was it was at least 705 plus, that rapid repair one. Okay, so let's do this one. Another 30 seconds. Okay. So let's go through this one. Which is a little easier than the last one, for sure. But we can do a lot of the same things with this, even though it's a weakened question, okay? And someone was asking, if you're not confident in the other choices, yeah, if you don't see why that one answer works and you can definitely eliminate all the others, absolutely do it. It's best to use a belt and suspenders method where you're eliminating all other four and selecting the correct one because you see why it's right. But if you can just eliminate four, definitely do it and get the question correct. So let's take a look at this one. I want to show you something here. Since the deregulation of airlines, delays at the nation's increasingly busy airports have increased by 25%. To combat this problem, more takeoff and landing slots at the busiest airports have been allocated must be allocated to commercial airlines, right? So this person, it's a plan question. And the one thing we want to notice about this, it doesn't have like your typical premise and a therefore. Often these plan questions, they just kind of give us the scenario and give us the plan. It says the delays are increased. It doesn't say why allocating, it doesn't say there, because takeoff and landing slots are helpful, it will therefore result. It's a plan question, it just gives us the plan. Okay, you need to be used to that. So when you see these, you're not thrown off. Oh, where's the premise? Okay, so now the question in this case, it's not a paradox. It's which of the following, if true, casts most doubt on the effectiveness of the solution, right? So once again, we want to identify exactly what we need to weaken, right? Exactly what that solution proposed above. More takeoff and landing slots at the busiest airports must be allocated to commercial airlines. So must be, by the way, this person is saying they must be allocated. But anyways, but that's not really the point here. The point is, will it work or not? So sometimes the question stem is super important and gives us more information. So this is not a standard weakened question where we're saying, why is the conclusion wrong? We're saying, why won't this plan work, as opposed to why must we not do it, which are two different things. So now we were talking about these arrows, up and down arrows, right? Let's take a look at this and see if we can do sort of the same thing. Let's look at choice A. Since deregulation began, the number of airlines, commercial airplanes in operation, has increased by 25%. Well, what does this do? It says the number of commercial airplanes in operation has increased by 25%. This choice actually confirms that commercial airplanes are probably the issue, right? So I'm going to give this an up arrow and say this is kind of a strengthener, right? Because we're saying, well, we're going to increase the slots allocated to commercial airplanes. Well, if we know that the commercial airplanes has increased as the delays have increased by about the same amount, then probably the delays are caused by the commercial airplanes. So clearly this is wrong for a weakened question. But notice we're still doing the same thing with the arrows. Is this irrelevant? It's about commercial airplanes. It's about the regulation. It's about an increase in the number in operation. It's certainly not irrelevant. So we're not just going with relevant versus irrelevant. And this is a way better way to go through the answer choices. Say, if you can say that this clearly goes in the wrong direction, that's a great way to eliminate it, right? So this one is gone. The second one, over 60% of the takeoff and landing slots in the nation's busiest airports are reserved for commercial airlines. I don't know, maybe that's right. It's saying it sounds like there's a bit of a constraint on what we can actually do. So I'm going to keep that for now. C, the major causes of delays at the nation's busiest airports are bad weather and overtaxed air traffic control equipment. Wow. So this is basically saying that the delays are caused by something other than the number of commercial airplanes in operation, right? And the number of landing slots. It's saying that delays are caused by bad weather. So does that mean, how is our solution of allocating more slots going to work? C is definitely looking good. How about D? Now, a lot of people might say this is irrelevant. It's about a small Midwestern airport. It's irrelevant, or is it relevant? I don't know. Is a small Midwestern airport relevant to this major airports, the increasingly busy airports with commercial airlines that are deregulated? We don't need to determine whether it's relevant. Why not? Because we can look at the direction of the choice and say, look, this is basically saying that the same plan, basically, sort of it sounds sort of like the same plan, although it doesn't say commercial airlines, but you get the idea. More takeoff and landing slots, the delays decreased. So I love to just say, look, I don't need to call this a strengthener. I don't need to prove that it's relevant. It's about a small airport. So I don't need to do that. What I can do is say, if anything, it strengthens the argument. So once again, this is an up arrow, and an up arrow does exactly the opposite of what we need. So you see how we're doing this? What is the main thing this choice tells us? The main thing this choice tells us is, does this plan work somewhere else? Okay, great. We don't need to go any further than that. It's going in the wrong direction. E, the main thing, what is the main thing E tells us? The average length of delay has doubled. Okay, great. It's saying the delays are bad. That's the main thing it tells us. Well, does that mean the solution won't work? The solution was never proposed to completely clear up the delays, right? Yeah, the delays are bad, but the same solution can work. Bad does not mean the same thing as not going to work. So that's the main thing the choice tells us. Looking back at B and C, well, B, over 60% of the takeoff and landing slots are already allocated, but the truth is there are a lot more available, and C is the very convincing choice, isn't it? With this, the major causes are totally different from what this person is going after. So, okay, C is our correct answer. Okay, any questions about this one? Let me check that. The difficulty level of this is relatively easy, if I recall correctly. Yeah, let's see. Find a lot of jumps in reasoning and official guide CR questions. How to get better at the harder types. Okay. Okay, I'll answer the last question first. Someone said, can we skip the options? I don't like to. The only reason you would really do that is if you're getting behind on the verbal section. Ideally, you won't just go with the correct, what you think is correct, because there's so many. It's so easy to make a mistake. It's so easy to miss something. The thing that saves me so often, and I've been doing this forever, is I think a choice is correct, and then I get to another, I'm like, man, that one seems correct too. And if I had just chosen the first one, I'd be done. And I've been doing this for ages. If I slack off at all, I can still miss a critical reasoning question. So I would suggest doing the belt and suspenders method of, the belt is holding up your pants and the suspenders are too. So work it from both sides. Work it from both sides. Eliminate the 4 and select the correct. If you can't do both, fine. If you're like, look, this choice is definitely correct, it definitely weakens the argument. I don't see what this other one really does. I'm choosing it, fine. If you're in the heat of the test, do that. But when you're practicing, don't. Especially when you're practicing, just be flexible with the time, Try to get to the point where you can have a rationale for every answer choice. Okay, have a rationale for every single one when you're practicing. And there's a reason for doing that. Let's say you get the question correct when you're practicing, but you didn't really understand why choice B is incorrect. Well, what if you see a choice where a question where you need to be explaining why that question is incorrect? So you haven't really practiced what you need to be doing, right? You're going to leave a gap in your skill set. So when you're practicing, do your best with every answer choice. And you don't need to go through 100 practice questions. If you do 10 and do a way better job, and really very carefully, it's way better than doing 30 just very quickly. Oh, I got them right. Well, I got most correct. That's you. If you want to nail this thing, you're best off just learning how to do every answer choice. Okay. The other choice, someone was asking, find a lot of jumps. Yeah. How to get better with the harder types. Well, there are a lot of jumps, but what we need to do is fill those in. We need to fill those in by saying, what's reasonable here? And we really saw it in those two questions, the beach versus the one about the marketing director. That's kind of the crux of what you're doing there. When you're saying there's a lot of jumps in the questions, you can make the jump from sunnier days to more people going to the beach. You can't make the jump from new marketing director to better or worse sales, So if it said that the old marketing director was the best one in the world, well, then obviously maybe we could say that the sales are going to go down with the new one. But if you don't have something like that, you can't. So yeah, you have to learn to make those jumps in what's reasonable. And people are asking about a couple of these choices. Again, D, first of all, once again, is there something about a small Midwestern airport really 100% relevant to this thing about the nation's busiest airports? We could debate that, right? But the point is, D is basically saying that allocating takeoff and landing slots, which is exactly what we talked about up here at the nation's busiest airports in the passage, it caused delays to increase. It seems to have, right? So it's basically saying that this plan works somewhere. It caused delays to increase, right? Decrease. So regardless of whether it's a small Midwestern airport, it's a strengthener. It basically is going in the right direction. Like if someone said, well, it worked in my part, I don't know, maybe it'll work here too. Regarding A, why is it a strengthener? It's a very subtle strengthener. It's basically saying, look, like what if it said since deregulation began, the number of commercial airlines did not increase? Well, then the plan wouldn't work at all, right? Because yeah, you're going to allocate more takeoff landing slots to commercial airlines. Okay, great. But there aren't any more than there were before. So I don't see how that's going to help. So this is confirming that there's a good chance that the choice A confirms that there's a good chance that the commercial airlines are the issue. So that's why it's a strengthener. Okay, cool. So, okay, what we've seen is that a reliable way to choose a choice or eliminate in critical reasoning is to consider the direction of the effect of the choice. Whether we're looking at a paradox question where we're looking for an increase, if the choice is showing why something is decreasing, it's not going to work. If we're looking for a decrease and why did more corn grow? Well, if something would explain why the amount of corn would be less, clearly that's wrong. But it also works in these questions to consider the direction. If possible, it's a very reliable way, like in choice D. It's not a perfect, strengthener, but we are considering a direction. It's going in the direction of the argument, so it's not a weakener. Great. That's the best way to eliminate the answer choices. Okay, let's hit another one. Let's do this again. Okay. And one thing I want you to do here is really pay very close attention to the details of the conclusion, because we really need to do that. As we saw in the paradox questions, we need to pay very close attention to what the correct answer best explains. In these argument questions, you have to be so clear about the conclusion. If you broaden it, generalize it, if you change it a little bit, if you paraphrase it. Some people say, well, I write the conclusion down. I really don't recommend that because you're probably going to shorten it, and you might shorten it in the wrong way. So anyway, as you're doing this question, pay very careful attention to the conclusion, and let's see how we do. 2 minutes for this one. Okay. Okay, let's hit this one. Let's go through it. The stadium manager has an issue. In recent years, the crowds in our stadium have become very rowdy. It's been proposed we discontinue sales of alcoholic beverages in the stadium. Wow, what kind of stadium would that be? I don't know, it might be fun. Anyway, taking this step would surely be severely detrimental to stadium revenues since much of it comes from sales of alcoholic beverages. Which of the following does the stadium manager assume in arriving at the conclusion? So as I was saying, when we're looking at these argument questions, we have to be very specific with the conclusion, okay? So, and this is an assumption question, and we're saying, which of the following does the manager assume in arriving at a conclusion? So I like to read the passage first, then read the statement, the question stem. So which of the following does the manager assume? So then we go straight to that conclusion because we know that the assumption is going to be something that supports the conclusion. Taking this step would surely be severely detrimental to stadium revenue. Okay, and then we have our support marker, since much of it comes from sales of alcoholic beverages. So the point of this argument is alcoholic beverage sales are much of the stadium revenue. So if we discontinue sales, taking this step, there's our look above marker. What's this step? Discontinuing sales of alcoholic beverages, we're going to be detrimental to stadium revenue. So if we're super clear about that, it's going to help a lot with getting through this question. Okay. So, and we, okay, let's take a look. How about A? The stadium can deter people from consuming large quantities of alcoholic beverages in the stadium through charging high prices. Okay. Are we talking about charging high prices? This argument is very only about taking this step. And I sometimes think of this sort of like in a business meeting. Let's say we're all sitting around that table, we're all meeting, and talking about a proposal. And someone says, well, what about this? Can you see somebody saying, wait a minute, first let's figure out whether this is going to be detrimental to revenue, Jim, and then we'll talk about this other thing. So in this meeting, would they be talking about whether they could deter, maybe in a general sense, whether they could deter people by charging high prices? But that's not the point of discussion right now. The point of discussion is whether discontinuing sales would be detrimental to revenue. Maybe they could deter people, but that doesn't tell us whether discontinuing sales would be detrimental to revenue. And we don't need to know whether we could do this other thing to know whether it's going to be detrimental to revenue, right? How about B? The costs associated with crowd revenue rowdiness do not outweigh the revenue from sales of alcoholic beverages. This choice is interesting. It sounds very important. It's certainly relevant in a way. It's about crowd rowdiness. It's about the revenue from sales. It's about cost. In a real meeting, we'd want to think about this. But what would the person running the meeting say? Say, Jim, hold on a minute. First, let's see if this is going to be detrimental to revenue. Jim is bringing up costs now, and whether they outweigh the revenue. Now, yeah, they might outweigh the revenue, in which case this might be a great plan. But we're not talking about whether it's a great plan. The conclusion is not whether this is a great. Notice that the stadium manager, never says this is a bad plan. All the person says is this will be detrimental to revenue. So we don't want to broaden the conclusion to think, well, the point is we're assuming it's a bad plan. We're not assuming anything about costs at all. Only point, and this is why we have to pay such close attention to the conclusion. The only point here is costs. The costs don't matter. The revenue could still be hit a lot by reducing alcohol sales. Okay, see, if alcohol beverages were not sold in the stadium, people attending events would not consume alcoholic beverages. Once again, this is about another aspect of the plan. We stop selling them, we're still going to have the problem. The stadium manager never said that we're going to still have the problem. That's not the point here. So this is why we have to pay such close attention to the conclusion. If you chose C, you broadened the conclusion. You said, well, maybe it's about the plan won't work. The stadium manager never said the plan won't work or the plan anything else. The person only said that it's going to be detrimental to revenue. So we can talk about these other points later in our meeting, but the only thing we're really concerned with is whether it's going to be detrimental to revenue, right? So C is out. What about D? People will be less inclined to attend events at the stadium if it were not possible to purchase alcoholic beverages in the stadium. Now, this sounds interesting because it certainly means if they're not going to even attend events anymore if we stop serving alcohol, then that definitely is going to be detrimental to stadium revenue. So I'm certainly keeping D. How about E? People unable to purchase alcoholic beverages in the stadium will not therefore purchase greater quantities of other goods sold in the stadium. Here's your classic assumption. So what's the difference between D and E? The main thing D is telling us is that yes, D is definitely telling us that it's going to be bad for revenue because not only are we going to lose the alcoholic beverage sales, but people are going to stop coming. But then E is doing something else. E is saying that people are not going to turn around and buy something else if we can't sell them alcoholic beverages, right? So they're not going to purchase greater quantities of other goods. So which one of these is better? Well, here's the deal, and there's a point to this. We really need to know a little bit about how these questions work. This is an assumption question, and it's key to know that a strengthener, an assumption is always a strengthener. Like if we state an assumption and say, look, your assumption is correct, well, that certainly strengthens the argument, but a strengthener isn't always assumption. And in this case, D is not an assumption. The person is not assuming anything about people not attending events, right? The person's using evidence about that we stopped selling alcoholic beverages. We already have our evidence, right? That we have these sales are going to go down, and therefore it's going to be detrimental to revenue. We don't now need to pile on and say, well, people aren't going to come either. So the strengthener is not always an assumption. So D is out. E, on the other hand, this person, you're saying, well, it's going to surely be detrimental to stadium revenue. Well, if we negate this choice and say people would purchase other things if they couldn't purchase alcoholic beverages, they would do it. Well, then one could offset the other, right? So it's not sure that it's going to be detrimental to stadium revenue. So there's a couple of points here. One is we need to be super clear about that conclusion. A, B, and C definitely. They definitely are interesting points. They seem relevant to the argument. And this is why we don't necessarily go with what's relevant, but we do see what we need to assume to support this specific conclusion. So you need to be very clear about the conclusion. And if you broaden that or change it or think it's something else, it's so easy to miss the question, right? And how do we know that's the conclusion? We know it's the conclusion because it's supported by this statement that begins with since, right? Since is our evidence marker. So it's supported by something else. When you see something supporting something else, what's supported is the conclusion, right? None of this other stuff is supported by anything. Okay. So we need to be very clear about the details. Being clear about details is super key. And the other thing, as I said, knowing how I personally, did okay on the GMAT without knowing everything about every question type, because a lot of what you can do, as you're seeing, is just look at the logic of the situation. But it really helps to know some key things about some of these question types. And one is that a strengthener is not an assumption, okay? So these are our two takeaways so far. For this one, is precision in noting key details is such as the exact details of the conclusion is essential for getting them correct. And the second is learning particulars of how critical reasoning works, questions work, can be helpful. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, the best way to answer assumption questions, negating definitely helps. D is the strengthener, someone said. Yep, good catch. Okay. You could use the negation method, absolutely. Yeah, you could also use the negation method. Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's go to the next one. And this one, let's do it again. And this one is super hard. In case that one wasn't hard enough, I brought a wicked hard one. I wasn't sure how hard you'd want to see. But look, pay close attention to the particulars of the conclusion. and how it's supported. Do the same thing again. What is the conclusion and where does it start? You know, where does the conclusion start? Read the whole thing, not just part of it, and see if you can get this one correct. We'll do it in 2 minutes again. Okay, like another 15 seconds. Okay, let's do it. Okay, and this I think it's either a 705 or 805 level question. And why is it hard? Let's see. Because of a technological breakthrough, all gas heating furnaces produced from next year on will be significantly more efficient than those currently in use in Verani. Accordingly, it can be expected as older furnaces are replaced with new ones. So here's our background information, this part about technological breakthrough. Accordingly, it can be expected, so that's starting to sound like a conclusion, the amount of gas consumed annually per household in Bavaria will decrease significantly. So actually, the first part is a premise. We're saying significantly more energy efficient, and then we're jumping from that to the amount of gas consumed. And we really want to read this entire conclusion, as I think a lot of you did, as older furnaces, it's as they're replaced with new ones. The amount of gas consumed annually per household will decrease, right? So we've jumped from energy efficiency to the amount of gas consumed annually in Verania decreasing per household. Okay. So now the key thing here is we don't want to shorten this conclusion, and we don't want to change it. It's not just that the amount of gas in Verania is going to decrease. It's not just that the amount of gas per household is going to decrease. It starts off with this part right here, as older furnaces are replaced with new ones, right? So if we only consider, if we're looking at, the conclusion is the amount of gas is going to decrease, well, maybe something that says it won't, it's going to work. But if we're very careful to read the entire conclusion, we're going to get this one correct. So which of the following most weakens the case for the claim name? Okay. Let's take a look at these choices. A is a very popular choice. In many cases, households use the same furnace for 20 years or more. So what is this saying? This is saying it's going to take a long time. What is the main thing? So the choice is saying, right? We always want to think, what is the main thing this choice is telling us? This choice is telling us that it's going to take a long time for furnaces to be replaced. Okay, great. Does that mean this isn't going to happen? The conclusion starts with as furnaces are replaced with new ones. It doesn't say that as furnaces are replaced with new ones next year. So 20 years makes no difference. A long time makes no difference. Second, because of environmental concerns, most people would prefer not to use fossil fuels such as gas. Okay, so this tells us people don't want to use gas. Well, what's the main thing it's telling us? There's a force against people using gas per household, right? If it said they love using gas, that might be a weakener. But this is going the right way. Now, is it a real strengthener? I don't know. I don't care. I'm just going to give it an up arrow and say it's gone. And, this is what I'm doing. If you read my explanations on GMAT Club, I actually thought about, well, what makes these explanations work? The point is, I'm figuring out what the main thing is the choice says. And the main thing here, it says people don't like it. There's a force against it. Okay, so I'm not saying it's a weakener. I'm in a strengthener, but we don't need to make it a real strengthener. All we have to do is say the fact that people don't want to use it certainly doesn't mean they're going to. And so people are asking about a story. I actually had someone make up a story about this. Well, if most people would prefer not to use them, then they're already not using it. So therefore, it's not going to go down. That's too much of a story. We don't really know. And a lot of time you can tell if you're making up too much of a story, if it could go either way. Okay, this could go either way. They don't want to use it. Oh, so they're not gonna. Or we could say, well, they don't want to use it, so they're already not using it. We can make up any kind of story, but we don't know really what they're doing, right? We can't make that reasonable expectation one direction or another. So if we're doing that paradigm we saw in those three little practice questions, the 1, 2, 3, 4. I think this B is anywhere from okay, they're going to use less gas because so decrease maybe. Or we could say it's a 4. It's just really not clear what's going on with the gas. We certainly can't just say, oh, for sure, this means we can't make up a story there, Okay, cool. A lot of people chose C, so I'm going to skip that one for now. D, an increasing number of households are replacing the gas heating systems with systems that use geothermal energy. Once again, which way? What's our arrow here? Our arrow here is an up arrow. This is in line with the argument, right? They're going to use less gas. The argument says they're going to use less gas. Yes. Can we say that it's going to be in the same time period as they're replacing their furnaces? I don't know. Do I care? All I can tell you is the fact that they're using geothermal energy certainly doesn't mean that they're not going to be using less gas. Now, E is the major tricky answer in this choice. The difference in efficiency between older gas furnaces and ones that use new technology is unlikely to cause most people to replace their furnaces. So wait a minute, they're not going to replace them, right? Well, there's two issues with this choice. One, it says the difference in efficiency is not going to cause most people to replace their furnaces. Some people choose E because they figure, well, that means the furnaces aren't really very efficient. But it actually said, the passage says, as we saw, that they're significantly more efficient, right? So choice E doesn't change that, and we can't go against the premise of the argument. The second thing about E is it says it's unlikely to cause most people to replace their furnaces. What is the main thing this choice is telling us? That most people won't replace their furnaces soon. Does that mean that as older furnaces are replaced with new ones, that we're not going to see a decrease? Aren't people eventually going to replace them? Common knowledge is that eventually furnaces are going to get replaced. And the other thing that we can use here that I like, even if I'm not sure if this is telling us that people are never going to replace, it says most people. Well, still some people are going to replace them. And as they do, the amount of gas consumed annually should decrease. Okay, so E was our trap. And once again, this is the crux. We've seen this in so many of these questions. The crux between a trap choice and the correct answer is the trap choice has the vibe. It seems to give us that weakener arrow, right? But actually, this doesn't change the argument at all. So what's going on with C? Currently, most households set their heating systems to uncomfortably low temperatures. We need to make that common sense connection, as I saw many of you did. If they're setting them to uncomfortably low temperatures now, because it costs so much. Well, when they get a new furnace and it doesn't cost as much, maybe they're going to turn up the thermostat and use the same amount they were using before. Now, someone could say, well, how do we know they're going to do that? How do we know it's even going to be the same, or it might still be less, right? You're absolutely right. But as I was saying before, a key thing for critical reasoning is just to know a little something about how each type of question works. And one thing we need to know about a weakened question is that we don't need to destroy the argument. If it casts doubt, this certainly casts doubt, and all it has to do is cast some doubt and say, look, it may not save any energy at all, because people are, they might just turn up the thermostats. They've been uncomfortable. Look at that. Look at the clue we get here. The context, uncomfortably low. There's something people don't like. What's reasonable? You get an efficient new furnace, you're probably going to turn it up a little bit, right? We can make that inference. It's not a crazy story. And so it does cast doubt on the conclusion, which is all a weakener needs to do. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, someone said with C is showing the consumption is already low. That's also interesting. They're already at uncomfortable low temperatures. That's another way of looking at it. And I guess pretty much we saw a lot of people chose E. And yeah, E is the most. I mean, so C. E is the most common trap, and this one is definitely. You might think it's easy. If it was easy for you're paying attention to the conclusion. I'm pretty sure it's a 705 or maybe even 805 on GMAT. Okay, so let's do it again. Now, one thing as we were talking about, knowing a little bit about some patterns and things can be useful. This is a relatively easy question, but I really wanted to show you how, like, if you don't need to know a lot, like all these details and crazy stuff and read a book this thick, but knowing a few things can be helpful. So let's take a look at this and see how that works. About 2 minutes for this one. And we got just a few more to go. And once again, I'm interrupting, I know. Just pay very close attention to the conclusion and the details of the argument. Let's see how many of us can get this correct. Maybe around another 30 seconds. Okay, cool. So this question highlights that if we know something about some patterns, it can be super helpful. So statistics show that less expensive automobiles are involved in collisions at much higher rates than more expensive ones. This information demonstrates clearly that expensive collision prevention features that cause automobile prices to be high are well worth their cost. So in this case, the conclusion is about whether these are worth their cost, right? And it's saying that they're well worth their cost. Demonstrates clearly, right? Okay, cool. Very strong statement. And what demonstrates that? Well, our support is the statistics show that the less expensive are in higher rates of collisions than more expensive. So basically, we're seeing a correlation. We're seeing a correlation between more expensive and lower rates of collisions, right? And this person is jumping from that to a conclusion that these collision prevention features are well worth their cost. So what do we need to know to evaluate the case for that claim? Okay, and this is definitely a tricky question, but if we know some patterns, we'll get it done a little easier. Let's start with some of the maybe. These choices are all interesting, but let's take a look at the conclusion one more time. The automobile prices, the collision prevention features that cause automobile prices to be high are well worth their cost. So how would we determine whether they're worth their cost? Well, do they prevent crashes or not? So let's try to find something that's easy to eliminate here. I'm looking at B, whether automobile manufacturers' profits on sales are inordinately high. Well, their profits, what do we care about the profits? I mean, yes, it could mean that you're getting in a way ripped off, but they could still be worth their cost to you, right? Even if the manufacturers are making huge profits on these, it could still help prevent an accident to such an extent that it's worth the cost. So I'm going to say, regardless of whether they're worth their cost or inordinately high, it could be worth the cost. Okay, how about C? Whether a significant percentage of automobile collisions involve both the relatively inexpensive automobile and relatively inexpensive automobile. Well, you know what? We've already been told something. Once again, one thing to know about these questions is we can't eliminate the premise. We can't go against the premise. We see much higher rates. So even if there are collisions with relatively expensive and relatively inexpensive, we already know that the rates are higher for the inexpensive. So this doesn't change what we know. Regardless if we say, yes, there are a lot of them. Well, but there's still collisions at higher rates with more expensive ones. How about E? Whether the expensive collision prevention features is due to high demand for them by purchasers. Well, if it's due to high demand, are they worth it? I don't know. People buy them, but it's due to high demand. Okay. Does that mean they're worth their cost? Maybe people buy a lot of things that they spend money on that are not worth anything, right? So I'm not going to go with that. Okay, so we're down to A and D. Let's look at A first. Whether any people's automobiles have collision prevention features disable them and drive. That's really hard to eliminate, but it says whether any people. If two people, would this really help? Let's think in the real world. If you're like, well, I've heard of some people who disconnect those features. So are they worth it? Well, there's a lot less collisions with the features, but there are a few people that disable them. Would that tell us whether they're worth it or not? It said whether most people, I would say then that would be an interesting piece of information. But whether any people, so yes or no, any people. Okay, great. Any people, 2 people, 3 people. We don't know how many people any people is. So that's not very helpful information. Now, where I was getting to with this question is, if we know the pattern of looking for a third cause, then D might jump out at us. And in the case of D, it says whether young drivers are more likely than old drivers to be able to afford relatively expensive automobiles with many collision prevention features. So we're basically saying, what would this choice tell us if we say, yes, young drivers are less likely than old drivers to be able to afford the collision prevention features? Well, now we've seen a correlation. That would be telling us that the young drivers are the ones that don't have the features, and the young drivers are probably the ones getting into the crashes, right? We see this is telling us there. And if we say no, then there's no correlation between young drivers and the crashes, right? So by looking and saying, well, what is the main thing this choice would be telling us? If we say yes or no, then we can answer this question. So there's 2 takeaways that really I wanted to highlight here. One is it's definitely, once again, helpful to know how these evaluate questions work. Or maybe even a 3. The second is, once again, noting the main point of a choice. What is the main thing it tells us? Well, this is telling us that the young drivers are the ones with the, if we say yes, the young drivers are the ones with the less expensive cars without the collision features. So the third thing is that if we understand this pattern, and there's some patterns we can learn with critical reasoning, we understand this pattern of a third cause. In this case, young drivers are causing both the inexpensive and the crashes, right? The reason we see inexpensive with low-cost automobiles with crashes because they're all driven by younger drivers. And I mean, you could say, well, how do we know older drivers are worse? We don't, but what we're seeing is a possible third cause, right? We're seeing a differentiating factor. Wait a minute. Young drivers definitely could get into crashes more, and they drive the less expensive cars. So if that is the truth, they can't afford the more expensive ones, then maybe it's just that the younger drivers are crashing more. Now, is it necessarily the case? No, but once again, that would definitely cast doubt on the conclusion if that answer choice is true. So D is our answer. Let's see, any questions on this one? Why are we assuming that young drivers are causing the crashes? You know, we don't know that for sure, but we can use common knowledge to say that probably young drivers. They can't afford expensive automobiles. That's a fairly, the demographic there is probably pretty young, right? And those people are probably less careful. I mean, it's in common knowledge. And the other thing is, we don't necessarily need to assume the young drivers are causing the crashes, but they certainly could be, and that would weaken the argument. Why is E incorrect? The reason E is incorrect because high demand doesn't necessarily prove that something is worth the cost, right? There's a lot of reasons why for high demand. It could be marketing, it could be a lot of things. I mean, so that's why D is a much better choice. It just really shows that G is showing us that there's a huge issue with this argument. That if we say yes, the younger drivers are better able to, or not as able to afford the features, we've really showed that there's a whole other correlation that could be causing this. Whereas E, it's like we really have to make up a story. The high demand means they're worth something. I don't know, or maybe just marketing got people to buy them. Okay, is it okay if we use real world logic or facts and the value? Absolutely, we need to use real world. Okay, we absolutely do need to use common knowledge. The only time we really don't want to use common knowledge is if they ask us what can be inferred or what can be concluded. And that goes for reading comp too. But if they say that in a critical reasoning or reading comp, what can be concluded from the passage? Well, then you can't use real world knowledge in that case because you're trying to figure out what can be concluded from the passage, right? But in other cases, yeah, we're expected to use common knowledge. And that's the only way we're going to get these correct. So you have to use common knowledge of how things work. But we're not making up stories. It really has to be something that always works that way. Like when it rains, the pavement gets wet, right? When it's dark, it's harder to see. We can use those. But we can't say when it rains, I don't know, people play more, people play more billiards or something. Now it's getting too like, well, do they really? I don't know. Now we're making it up. Yeah, so somebody's wondering about A. It absolutely, if everybody turned off the collision prevention features and drove without them, that would destroy the argument. But it says whether anybody does it. Anybody, like whether any people, like, so that starts with 2. It doesn't give us a number. If it said whether most people disable them, that would destroy the argument, right? Yeah, A is incorrect because of any. Now, okay, cool. Now that we've gone through where the pattern actually works, if you know about D, if you know about this third cause pattern, you probably got this one without too much trouble. Let's do it. We're going to do a couple more questions, and this next one is definitely an 800 level. The patterns are not going to help. Okay, I'm warning you. And the reason I'm saying this is because so often the whole point of this session is tips on making critical reasoning click. Okay, so that's why we're going through the up arrows, the down arrows, how to look for trap choices, how not to tell your stories. We're not going through every possible scenario, every possible question type today. It's just things you need to know to make critical reasoning click. And obviously, one of them is that if we learn a few patterns, it can really help with getting these questions right a little more easily, as we saw in this question. If you know the pattern of the third cause of the younger people or whatever it is, something that causes both the inexpensive cars and that crashes, if you know about if you know how, A causes B and C, if you know that pattern, you're going to have a little more easy time with these questions. But I also want to warn you that GMAT knows that we learn these patterns, right? So I want to help you make critical reasoning click. So I'm going to warn you, don't always go with the patterns. Don't always go with what you've heard. If you hear that, oh, extreme choices are always wrong, well, guess what? Somebody at GMAT knows you're thinking that, and they're going to write a question that uses an extreme choice in the correct answer. Why? Because they want to see if you're looking. So this next question is going to be brutal. And if you're looking at the patterns, you're definitely going to get it wrong. So I want you to do all the things we've been talking about. Look at the conclusion very specifically, right? You need to look at the specifics of the question. Look at each choice very carefully. Use common knowledge and think about what's logical as opposed to just what's a pattern you've heard about before. Let's do it. We only have 2 minutes for this one, and this will be our second to last question. So this is definitely a tricky one. Have fun. Okay, let's do like another 20, 30 seconds. Nobody got it yet. Nobody got it yet. It's definitely going against a pattern that you've probably learned. Oh boy, somebody got it. Okay, cool. Let's go. Let's go. And this one, I brought this one up because I would just really get you thinking about, we have to think about the specifics of a question, right? If someone's asking about pre-thinking, yeah, you know, people talk about that, and I've heard people say it's useful. I couldn't bring myself to do it personally. I really want to see what the specifics of a question are. And if I'm predicting an answer based on something I've seen before, or based on how I think the questions work, there's such a good chance I'm going to come up with the wrong answer. You know, and then I'm going to waste my time. I just spent all that time thinking about what could be correct. Now I'm going to look for it. I've seen people, they look for it, then they see something that looks like it. They're not sure if it's right. Now they're wasting all this time. I think pre-thinking is way different from just noting. So, you know, someone say, well, there's another thing. Someone will say, what about pre-analyzing? Absolutely. Go through the passage. And we haven't done that much today, because I just wanted to show you some key tips about how to think about these questions overall. But definitely go through the passage and think about the premise, the background information, the conclusion, how they all work together. Think about the argument. You can think about what gaps there are in the argument, if you've heard of the gap in the argument. And we'll talk about that in a second. But pre-thinking an answer and really thinking, well, I know it's going to be right, that can, you know, that'll get you to a mid-level verbal score, but it's not going to get you to a high verbal score, because it's not going to get you correct answers to the hard questions, and it's actually going to take some of your time that you need. Okay, so let's go through this. Population growth in our country is causing a housing crisis because resources for creating housing at the rate necessary for keeping up population growth are in short supply. So this person is saying, this person is definitely saying, look, this is, you know, these resources are in short supply. That's why they're stating as fact that the population growth is causing a housing crisis. Okay. Then the conclusion is, to make housing affordable for our citizens, we must, now notice this, we must find a way. And this is a key thing you need to learn about in critical reasoning, is this idea of something being necessary versus sufficient. This person has noticed we're not saying the plan is going to be sufficient. This person is saying this plan is necessary. We all see, so often we see plans that are basically sufficient, and then we weaken the argument by saying the plan is not sufficient. So one of the things we want to do is look at the specifics of this, and getting good with necessary and sufficient is great. It works for two-part analysis too. We see it a lot there. They have those questions with the only if, and like what's necessary and what can we infer, you know. So this is good to know about these necessary conditions. So this person is saying we must find a way. Notice the president never said this way would work. Saying this way is necessary. We must find a way to reduce the rate of population growth by at least 30%. So this person is stating that something is necessary. So that's the key to getting this one correct. At least 30%. Okay. So we have we've jumped. Now talking about the gap in the argument. The gap in the argument we can define as the difference between the premise, the topic of the premise, and the topic and the conclusion. The topic of the premise is that the population growth is causing a housing crisis. The topic of the conclusion is at least 30%. Are those the same thing? Let's see. Let's look at A. If the country's population were to stop growing, it would take several years for the supply of housing to become sufficient for the housing crisis to be solved. Once again, we look at the main thing the choice is telling us. This is telling us if we reduce population growth to nothing, it will take a long time. Okay, great. Does that mean we don't need to do it? Does that mean it's not a necessity? It's basically just telling us it'll take a long time. That's the main thing. Clearly, that's not a weakener. I'm going to skip B. When the housing crisis began, the country's rate of population growth is lower than it is currently. We can make up a lot of stories about that, but does it weaken the argument to say it was lower when the housing crisis began? Basically saying the crisis was occurring when there was even lower population growth. So we could spin this a bunch of ways. We could say, well, that means we have to get even lower than that, right? I don't really know what this means. I'm giving it a big question mark, but this doesn't really clearly say that we don't need to do this, right? Okay, how about D? Even with a greater supply of resources, it might not be possible to create housing fast enough to keep up. Well, wait a minute. Is this a weakener? Notice, If the plan were to add resources, then this would be a weakener. But the conclusion is we must find a way to reduce population growth. So this is saying if we have more resources, it's not going to solve the problem. That is the main thing the choice is telling us. We always want to say, what is the main thing it's telling us? It's saying that increasing resources might not work. That's a strengthener. This person is saying we must do something. This is saying that something else won't work. That strengthens the argument. This is an up arrow. We wanted a down arrow, meaning that we wanted a weakener. This is saying the conclusion is probably correct. Amazing how important it is to be clear about the conclusion. Finally, there are factors other than population growth that are having an upward effect on housing prices in the country. Oh boy. This one is so hard to eliminate. If we know the pattern of these questions, we're like, wait a minute. We know the pattern. It says if there's a plan, but there's other issues. We saw it in the airline question. There are other issues. There's the weather and the air traffic control. So therefore, the plan is not going to work. So what is the key thing here? The key is we need to pay very close attention to the conclusion. And the person never said that the plan would work. The point is that we must do this. It's necessary, right? And if you can believe it, this question is one of mine based on an official question that does the same thing. So they do this, okay? They change the conclusions up on us because they know we're looking for a certain pattern. We have to be careful. We must. Well, the fact that there are other factors doesn't mean that we don't have to do this, right? This is bringing up and saying we might have to do something else too. So why is B correct? Some studies have shown that if the country's rate of population growth were 20% lower, the rate of growth in the supply of housing might exceed the population growth rate. Well, look at that. It's saying it might not be necessary, isn't it? The main thing this choice is telling us is that population growth, reducing the growth by 30% may not be necessary. We might be able to do it with a 20%, right? Okay, so if we do it with 20%, then we don't need 30%. So the must is dropping out of the picture. So this is, we don't need at least 30%. That's what the choice is telling us. It's perfect. So there's your correct answer. Now, another pattern that might have caused you to eliminate this one is it says some studies, right? Some studies. We've all seen the pattern before. In fact, we saw it. Did we see it in a previous question? No, we didn't. I'm trying to remember. Been so many already. Anyway, some studies, right? We've seen that pattern before. We all know the answer that says some is always wrong. In fact, when I was working at TTP years ago, someone said, well, someone actually did a whole study of questions and said, I never see some correct, you know? Well, I've seen an official question in the new practice test in the most recent version that some is the correct answer. And there's a good chance they were even looking at it and saying they know that all of us, that we eliminate choices based on some, so some wise guy puts some in the correct answer, right? So just because it says some doesn't mean it doesn't work. If we know how these weakened questions work, all we need to do is cast a little doubt. And it definitely casts a little doubt to say that if it was 20% lower, it might work. Well, that casts a little doubt. That's all we need to do. There's the correct answer. It's B. So the big warning here is yes, it's great to learn the patterns. They're very useful, but don't try to shoehorn every question into the patterns. They don't always work. And the harder questions, I saw an assumption question. We all learned about all these cause and effect. 2 answer choices were the pattern. An official assumption question where 2 of the answer choices follow the pattern, and the correct answer did not follow the pattern. And you know what? Yes, I got smoked because I was so proud of myself. I eliminated one of the choices that followed the pattern. I chose the other one. It was the other one. It was the third one. So, carefully consider the specifics of each question. Okay. Okay, let's see. Any questions? Okay. So yeah, once again, someone's asking, how does B work? It says some studies, that might exceed. All we're doing is, once again, casting a little doubt. That's all we need to do for a weekend question. Is say, like, you know what? I don't know. Once again, we're in the meeting and someone says, hey, Jim speaks up. Did you think of this? I've seen some studies that said it's 20% lower to work. That's all we need. Okay, let's do one final question. And in this question, it's pretty cool. And I really brought up this one because it really shows we have to be very careful with our reading. We got to make sure we understand everything we read, because the passage is a little hard to read. You have to be super careful reading the passage. And we really need to use sophisticated thinking, you know, and that's my last point about critical reasoning, making it click. It's a big theme we've seen here, right? Is that we have to use sort of sophisticated thinking. We have to use logic. We can't over rely on patterns. We have to pay very close attention to details. So do this question and really think about the choices carefully. And don't just say, oh, this is relevant. This is, you know what I mean? Like in scope, out of scope. Who knows what's in scope? What's out of scope? You know, as we saw in some of these questions, well, something that seems unrelated, we can connect it. So you're better off just saying this choice, what does it do? So let's take a look at this as our final question, and it definitely takes some sophisticated thinking to get it correct. Another 15, 20 seconds. How are we looking? Okay. Let's go through this. Wrap up with this tricky one. Has been observed, the countries that spend more on education than on defense tend to publish more research papers for every dollar spent than countries that spend more on defense than on education. Thus, to support technological advancement most efficiently, a country must prioritize education over defense. All right, it's an interesting argument. So basically, we're jumping from a correlation more on education than on defense, with more research papers for every dollar spent. And we're jumping from that to technological advancement most efficiently. Once again, we want to be very clear about the conclusion, okay? So notice that we're not going to shorten this conclusion. It says to support technological advancement, the conclusion is not just that a country must prioritize education over defense. The conclusion is not just to support technological advancement. There's all three parts. Is to support technological advancement. The second part is most efficiently. and therefore a country must prioritize education over defense, right? So we want to pay very close attention to that conclusion, because otherwise some of these choices are going to seem correct. So there's your typical move, right? Be very clear about the conclusion. We can also be clear about the gap in the argument. And we do have a big change in topic here. The premise is about publishing more research papers, and the conclusion is about supporting technological advancement most efficiently. Those are definitely two different topics. Research papers versus technological advancement. Do we really know that they're connected? Let's go through these choices. Okay, I'm going to start with E. Many papers published as a result of research related to defense have contributed to technological advancement. Okay, great. What is the main thing the choice is telling us? The main thing the choice is telling us is research papers work. And they work when they are related to defense. They do contribute to technological advancement. But notice, this doesn't change our comparison. This is saying many is sort of a synonym for some. Some papers published, many papers published. Okay, we know that some papers published have contributed to technological advancement. Great. So defense works. But the point was never that defense investment doesn't contribute to technological advancement, right? It's just that education is better. So E doesn't change the comparison. D, a country cannot rely solely on its technological capabilities to defend itself against other nations. I didn't see anyone choose this one. You know, this weak in the argument. Well, we all know well enough that regardless, this is a whole other topic. This is one of the few choices we've seen today that's completely irrelevant. This is telling us we need defense to defend ourselves. Okay, great. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to be faster for technological advancement to invest in education, right? So this is definitely an off-topic choice. Some research papers, C, are so theoretical that they do not lead to any technological advancement for decades. Some people probably eliminated this just because it says some. And you know what? I guess in this case, it sort of works. But the real reason we want to eliminate this, I'm going to think about it. What if it said this? Like, if you think it's totally irrelevant, if we cross these parts out, the 4 decades and the sum, research papers do not lead to any technological advancement. It's certainly, that would certainly be relevant, because then it doesn't matter whether we publish research papers, right? So I wouldn't say that this choice is completely irrelevant. But I would say that because it says some and for decades, that it doesn't really change the calculus much. It means, okay, there's other research papers that would be published that do contribute to technological advancement, and also 4 decades. Well, then they eventually contribute to it, maybe, right? They eventually contribute after decades. Is that fast? Is that efficient? I don't really know. It could be. So, and for all we know, the defense ones take just as long as the education ones, so it doesn't really change the comparison. Finally, B. Notice what we're doing here. We're using some pretty sophisticated analysis, right? We're not just saying this is irrelevant or relevant. We're not going in and out of scope. We're really thinking about what each of these choices says. And B does say that countries have seen their rates of technological advancement increase as a result of increased investment in research related to defense. So that does seem to weaken the argument. I'm going to keep that one. Going to A. Many countries choose not to publish research papers on the scientific discoveries made by employees of the defense departments. This is really interesting. How many people eliminated this because you thought it was completely irrelevant? A lot of people do, okay? You see this thing about employees and you're like, wait, employees, this is about employees, about choosing not to publish. This seems pretty irrelevant. It's off topic. But I have a question. Let's think about this a little more deeply. If countries choose not to publish research papers on the scientific discoveries made by employees of their defense departments, doesn't that kind of imply that they're making more discoveries than we know about? So this is sort of interesting, because we know they get more research papers for every dollar spent with education. But maybe the reason for that is they're choosing not to publish them, and they're still making the scientific discoveries, right? So that choice, what's the main thing this choice is telling us, is that the data isn't any good. Yeah, there are more research papers for every dollar spent, but they're just not, many of them don't even bother publishing them when they're made by defense departments. So that's interesting. So I'm tempted to accuse it, but we really should eliminate B first. Many countries have seen their rates of technological advancement increase as a result of increased investment in research related to defense. It certainly seems relevant. It certainly seems to come down on the side of defense, but we need to do sophisticated reasoning here and look at this. Does this really change the comparison? It's saying if the main thing this choice is telling us, if you increase defense spending, you get more technological advancement. Okay, great. But what about increased education spending? You might get even more technological advancement. We don't have a comparison here. And if you don't understand that, let me know. But basically, we're saying we get more research papers from education and defense. We never said we didn't get any. So technological advancement could still be happening from defense. We never said it wasn't happening. So if you increase defense spending, you should get more technological advancement, right? That totally makes sense. If we double defense spending, you're going to get more technological advancement in defense. If you double education spending, you get even more from education. And education seems to be the winner, and this doesn't change the comparison. So that's why B is out. So the correct answer here with some sophisticated thinking is A. And I wanted to bring this one up just so you'd see, this is the way you want to be thinking about these choices, right? Go beyond what's relevant or irrelevant. Go beyond, like if it says employees, that doesn't mean it's not our answer, right? It says employees of the Defense Department. Sure, it's a new topic, but we have to make that common sense connection and say, well, we can't say that the fact that these employees of the Defense Department, that's connected. Scientific discoveries are connected. Publishing research or not publishing research papers is connected. So we can't say that choice A is irrelevant, and we have to take another close look and say, what does this say? And the main thing it's telling us is that the data is a little questionable, that we're not really getting the full picture. Okay. One other issue people have with this question, sometimes they have a hard time reading the past, the research, publish more research on every dollar spent in countries. They read that a couple times. If you had a little trouble reading it, once again, I would say just make sure you're very careful and make sure you understand what you're reading, so that you totally get, okay, this is a comparison between the research papers per dollar spent. You want to be very clear about that so that you realize that you can make that connection and see why A is correct, okay? So those are our two takeaways here. To consistently get them correct, make sure you understand what's written. And as you saw, sometimes you need to do some sophisticated thinking. It's not just going to follow a normal pattern. This question was a little out of the box. And you might have to do some sophisticated thinking. And that's the way you're going to get harder ones correct. The more sophisticated you're thinking, the higher your level of accuracy and the higher your critical reasoning score. So here's a review of our takeaways. Okay, we have a few questions here. Okay, Rajiv, are you still wondering why we eliminated B? Or do I need to re-explain that? Let me know, please. Any tips on how to maintain under time pressure? Yeah, I mean, if you're really, when you practice critical reasoning or practice verbal or any topic, really focus on your process and make sure your process is very good. Develop very solid habits when you're practicing. We're going to talk about that more in a minute, but develops a very solid process so that even when you're under time pressure, the habits you fall into are the ones that work, okay? Someone asked about, asked about how to eliminate E in this question. We have to be very careful about the conclusion. The conclusion here is what we must do, right? This person is saying we must find a way. The person never said that way is going to work, okay? So E is bringing up the wrong thing. We must find a way to get this situation solved. We must do something. Notice what E is saying. E is telling us there's other factors that we might need to take into account in order to solve the problem, right? Well, there might be other factors, but that doesn't mean we don't need to reduce this, do this one thing that this person's talking about. Like, for instance, if we say we need sugar to make the cake taste good, does it matter? If we say there are other ingredients you need too, that doesn't mean we don't need sugar, right? We need flour, we need water. Okay, great. But we still need sugar. And that's what this person is saying. This person is saying it's necessary. Okay. Okay. Going back to this question. Please explain why I eliminated B. Right. B is just saying when we invest more in defense, we get more technological advancement. We can invest in a lot of things to get more technological advancement. Does that mean the conclusion is that it's not that we'll just get, that's why we have to look so carefully at these conclusions, right? The conclusion is not simply that we will get technological advancement, right? The conclusion is to achieve it most efficiently. And we've seen that we're getting more research papers if we invest in education. So if the conclusion was simply to get technological advancement, we need to invest in education. Well, B would be a weakener because it says you get technological advancement when you invest in defense. But in this context, it's just saying basically the main thing B is telling us is we get technological advancement when we invest in defense. Okay, great. Is it better than education? Is it worse? It doesn't really tell us. It doesn't compare with education. It doesn't say we get more technological advancement from defense than we get from education. It just says we get technological advancement. We already knew we got research papers from defense. So the reason B we can eliminate it is because it doesn't change the comparison. It only talks about, basically, simply put, it talks about defense only. So now another question I saw someone saying is, how do I eliminate trap choices? I'm always stuck between the last two. Two things you want to do. One is practice. When you practice, don't guess between the last two. Even if it takes you 20 minutes to get to choose between, well, do it. You need to practice what you need to do, right? And choosing between the last two is the key to getting these questions correct, right? Because we can, 90% of the time we get to the last two. So you really have to get to those. You have to when you're practicing, learn to choose between the last two. And the other thing is do what we've been doing. Okay, let's go through our takeaways. Here's how you're going to get through to choose between those trap choices. Identify the implications of statements and make those common sense connections, right? Identify exactly what the correct answer must do. Because that's why you're looking, half the time people are looking between those last two choices because they're not 100% clear what the correct answer must do. Okay, identify the main thing each choice says, right? That's how you're going to tell whether it's a trap or not. Wait, the main thing this says is X, Y, Z. That's not what I need. And trap choices, yes, they have the vibe. So we have to look and say, well, which one just has the vibe of doing what the correct answer must do? That's why it's a trap. And which actually does it. Consider the direction. As opposed to going relevant versus irrelevant, yeah, you get down to two choices that are relevant. Well, which one takes us in the direction we need to go? Note those key details, right? Like details of the conclusion. You have to note the more details, the clearer you see what's going on, the less the trap is going to look correct. And if you really get the passage, a lot of time the correct answer jumps out at you. Okay, and all these other, don't over rely on patterns. Make sure you understand what's written. A lot of time people are going between two answers because you're not 100% sure what's written. And finally, use sophisticated thinking, like as we did on this last question. Say, let me think it a little more in depth here. And that's how you're going to get these questions correct. Now notice, let's talk a little bit briefly about how to prepare effectively. Okay. Yeah, and finally, okay, so someone's talking about speed. So let's talk about that. We got a topic-focused study. Obviously, it's going to help a lot if you work on weekend questions, you learn how to do that. Then work on assumption questions, learn how to do that. Then work on one topic at a time. Because you're going to build, you answer one question of a type and you learn, oh, I see. Like you learn, oh, it only has to cast doubt. I didn't know that. I thought I had to really prove the conclusion wrong. So now you can apply that in your next question and get it right, you know? Practice untimed at first. Speed comes from skill. I have someone asking about how to speed up. A lot of it's going to come from the same, all these things we've been talking about are going to make you fast, because if you really clearly see what's going on in the answer choices, the passage, you can think about the direction. You're very good at identifying the main thing each choice says. That's really going to speed you up. And a key thing is that thing about seeing the main thing that's going on. What is the main thing this argument says? What is the main thing this answer choice says? The quicker you can identify that, the faster you're going to be. But generally speaking, skill is going to make you fast. Okay, so practice on time at first. You can be conscious of the time, but be flexible with the time, because you have to choose between those last choices, you know. And so, yeah, you want to understand every answer choice. Don't just skip some, and choose between, definitely choose between those infamous last two choices. We all have trouble with the last two choices, and you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Okay, it's going to be tough. It's going to be, you're going to sit there and go, man, this question is driving me crazy. You know, critical reasoning, the easy ones, yeah, you burn through them. It's like some of the incorrect choices are totally off topic. But man, you get to those harder questions, it becomes so uncomfortable. You're like, oh man, I still don't see this. Get used to that. Go through that process. You're going to get used to it. You're going to get faster. You're going to build endurance. And when you miss a question, sure, you missed it. Okay, great. Analyze why you missed it so you can build on that. You know, build on why, figure out why you missed it, build on that. That's why we do topic focused study, because you figure out why you missed one, apply what you learned to the next. Okay, and I like practicing one question, not always, but a lot of time, do one question at a time. Okay, do one question at a time, and that way you can check your answer and say, okay, what did I do? Then you go to the next question. You say, okay, I'm going to do this one a little differently because I missed the last one, because whatever, I didn't read the conclusion carefully enough, right? I relied on a pattern. Then you can build on what you're doing. So answer them one at a time. Then later you can do time sets of 15, 10, 20 questions, right? I've seen people do great in critical reasoning doing just one question at a time. Okay. Finally, foster a growth mindset. Even if you're not good at this now, you can become good at it. I see people go, oh, I'm so great at quant, but I'm terrible at verbal. That's just who I am. No, that's not it at all. You learn, you have to believe that you can grow your skills, you can develop. You can develop just as you learn quant by doing math for your entire life, or whatever it is. You can learn verbal by developing yourself as well. And there's the things, they have so much in common. It's all about logic. Yes, it may not be easy. Don't be surprised if it's not easy, but you can do it. And finally, the big theme here is maintain a winning mentality. And a lot of it is having that growth mindset, but a lot of it is being detail oriented, you know, not slacking off. As I said, I've been doing this for ages. If I slack off in any way, I can miss a hard critical reasoning question still. You need to be paying attention to those details. Be very intense. And another thing is just plain have fun with it. Play it like a game, play it like a puzzle, get into the game, and you'll do better that way. So having that winning mentality where you're really paying attention and enjoying yourself is going to be the way to get these questions correct and get that high score. Okay, so I guess we're done. I don't see any more questions coming in. That's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be doing 3 more sessions every couple of months. The next one is going to be a couple months out, or a month or two out, and then basically spaced out like that on some general stuff for reading comp, similar to what we did here today. Another one on accuracy so far, and another one on speeding up, in case you're still around. I don't know. I think that 4th one is probably coming early, or late 2025 or early 2026. But anyway, it's been great. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care.